Welcome to the Independent Review, a weekly podcast where we bring you the latest from the world of independent journalism. Whether you're a news junkie, a curious learner, or just looking for a fresh perspective away from the corporate media, this is the show for you. So join us now as we dive into the world of independent journalism on the Independent Review.
Welcome to this week's episode of the Independent Review. Today we will go over some clips from James Corbett, the Free Thought Project, Patrick Lancaster, Rebunked News, and The Last American Vagabond with Ryan, Cristian, and Whitney Webb. This first clip will be from James Corbett. Let's take a look.
Welcome back to New World Next Week. I'm James Corbett of CorbettReport.com.
And I'm James Evan Pilato for MediaMonarchy.com. The health and well-being of our personnel are our top priority. We've got that story plus foreign agent follies, but first, of course, you're thinking of this place all wrong, as if I had the money back in a safe. The money's not here. Silicon Valley Bank collapse sparks bank runs as people wait in lines. Another headline, record bank run drained $42 billion of SVB's deposits in hours, leaving it with negative $1 billion. And of course, inside the legal loophole U.S. regulators used to bail out SVB depositors. So what are we talking about here? Since it feels like a lot of people love to look at the trees, James, we generally try and offer a view of the forest instead here on New World Next Week. Prepare for governments to push CBDCs in the wake of the Silicon Valley Bank collapse. We grabbed this from reclaimthenet.org. Over 100 of the world's governments are planning to push central bank digital currencies, CBDCs, and the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank may have given them the perfect opportunity to introduce this nightmarish surveillance technology. The heightened fear of bank runs and the growing calls for more government controls to prevent another Silicon Valley Bank-style event have created space for governments to swoop in and present CBDCs as the solution to the problem that you're reacting to. Prepare for these talking points to probably become pretty prominent as governments ramp up their efforts to push CBDCs. Talking point number one to watch out for, CBDCs will protect you from social media bank runs within days of this failure, and this all pretty much happened over the weekend. It was described as the first social media-fueled bank run in history, and fears about social media disinfo started to be stoked. During an emergency call with high-ranking federal officials, Senator Space Twin himself, Mark Kelly, asked if the officials were reaching out to tech platforms to monitor misinformation and bad actors, and inquired about the possibility of censoring social media posts to avoid a bank run. I think it's because Russia bad. We don't want bad foreign actors. Talking point two, CBDCs will provide financial stability. As SVB collapsed, the prospect of widespread financial contagion loomed. And again, have you ever heard the word contagion talked about finances? I think that's a real interesting part of this, James, the language that they're using. Oh, it's just, viruses and COVID and your money. It's got, my money's gotten sick. Companies said they were left unable to pay staff. Large online platforms delayed payments to sellers. Other companies revealed they held significant portions of their cash at SVB. While the U.S. Gov stepped in to guarantee customer deposits, it appears to have averted much of the wider financial collateral damage, although we don't know because it's going to take time for all this to roll out. Don't worry, Brandon said he's vowed to reduce the risks of this happening again. If you give us more power, we'll totally protect you for the next time. Talking point three, CBDC should be used for customer deposit protection. Many governments have already cited making direct payments to citizens as one of the main cases for CBDCs. If more banks fail, expect more governments to start increasingly focusing on CBDCs as a solution for affected customers. During the last major crisis, no, not Ukraine, the COVID scamdemic, governments leveraged uncertainty and the fear of the virus to push dystopian surveillance technology such as contact tracing, vaccine passports, and of course digital ID. These things are all intricately connected. Expect them to use the same playbook while pushing CBDCs. Governments likely to use talking points that of course tap into people's fear of losing money during times of economic turbulence and use of course false promises of safety and stability to lure citizens into the CBD system. Do not be fooled. Government's already made it clear. They plan to strip users of their financial freedom and privacy, if you think you're going to drive your truck in some weird way in Canada, by imposing CBDC spending limits and controls and, of course, removing pesky anonymity. Reject every shred of this. Put, James, I think a little more bluntly, and actually you are linked up in this article by Mark Crispin Miller. With big banks going under, CBDCs can't be far behind, and if we don't stop them, lockdown will be total and eternal for all of us. Once the economy's melted down, CBDCs will be proffered as the only way we can get back to normal. A cure that'll be about as catastrophic as those vaccines were. Now, James, is it a coincidence that the same banksters, gangsters, tiny hats, and petas and warmongers that demolished the economy in 2008 are the same exact people back here doing it again 15 years later?
No, it isn't a coincidence. But why stop at 2008? As real conspiracy realists will know, this isn't 2008 Redux. This is 1907 Redux. More on which in a moment. But take a deep breath. James, hold my beer. I'm going to condense a 1-hour Corbett Report podcast down into a 5-minute New World Next Week segment. So, here we go. On the CBDC note, I will point out the fact that the A3 podcast has just, as I am speaking here, as we're recording this, just a few hours ago, published a podcast on this exact scenario. CBDCs can arrive next month. Are you ready? And he lays out point by point how the bank run contagion can spread in a way that will then be used to proffer that prearranged solution. It's worth checking out. I'll include it in the links in the show notes. But okay. All right, I guess the first order question that we have to tackle here is, what was SVB? What really was it? And that question is answered by Wall Street on Parade, aka Pam and Russ Martins, who says Silicon Valley Bank was a Wall Street IPO pipeline in drag as a federally insured bank. And they have a great article up on this that goes through how this was a Wall Street IPO machine that enriched the investment banks on Wall Street by keeping the IPO pipeline moving. It padded the bank accounts of the venture capital and private equity middlemen, and it minted startup millionaires for ideas that often flamed out after the companies went public. This was an incredibly inherently risky investment bank. The fact that it was that it held a federally insured banking charter and was backstopped by U.S. taxpayers is ridiculous. But even more ridiculous, as they go on to point out in that really important article, they found that there was a sort of a secret bailout that was going on of SVB last year through the Federal Home Loan Bank of San Francisco, which pumped $15 billion into SVB as of December 31st, 2022. $15 billion should be ringing some bells because that's the exact amount of unrealized losses that the bank reported on January 19th. But anyway, sort of the secret bailout going on, which makes no sense because the Federal Home Loan Bank is supposed to be for promoting mortgages to individuals and loans to promote affordable housing and community development, not for bailing out this Silicon Valley venture capital investment bank, piggy bank, that they were using for tech startups, pharmaceutical startups. Ginkgo Bioworks had a lot of money in there. That's a name that should ring some bells for people. Climate tech startups, a lot of this woke green nonsense that was never going to pan out, but hey, you can ka-ching on all the way to the Silicon Valley Bank, right? So, but don't worry, guys. The investors got out just in time, right? What investors? Oh, like Peter Thiel, of course, as people probably know by now, but also, as the broken clock that's right twice a year at The Intercept will tell us, Gavin Newsom. Yes, cheering Silicon Valley Bank bailout, Gavin Newsom doesn't mention he's a client. At least 3 of the California governor's wine companies are held by SVB, and a bank president sits on the board of his wife's charity. What a beautiful, incestuous little circle that is. So I guess the question is, how did this happen? What really happened to precipitate this? Because, as I say, they reported on January 19th, $15 billion in unrealized losses, which is kind of a big deal for a bank. But actually, the next day, the stock price went up 16%. Yay! Those great, real hard-edged stock analysts decided, hey, that sounds like a winner. Let's bet on that. The bank passed its stress tests. It passed its FDIC examinations. It passed a financial audit by KPMG the week before it went under. It passed its state regulatory audits. So what happened? What really caused this bank run crisis. Oh, as it turns out, prominent venture capitalists advised their tech startups to withdraw money from Silicon Valley Bank, while mega institutions such as JP Morgan Chase & Co. sought to convince some SVB customers to move their funds. So you have this double whammy of people saying, hey, get out of this bank, they're going under, and JP Morgan and others going, hey, come over here. And as is now being reported, who are the immediate big beneficiaries of this? Well, get it from no less an authority than the Financial Times. Large U.S. banks inundated with new depositors as smaller lenders face turmoil. Yep, all these regional banks are suddenly in stress, and people are flocking to JP Morgan, Citigroup, the big name banks. It's quite obvious who is cui bono? Well, obviously the big banks, who apparently seem to have started the rumors that started this ball rolling. And that, as I say, should ring bells for 1907 for people who are paying attention to the century of enslavement. And remember the big banking panic of 1907, the Knickerbocker Trust going under and all of that, the Trust Investment Bank and the, who caused that again? Oh, right, JP Morgan spreading rumors about his rivals so that he could then coordinate the bailout process to A, be seen as the savior of the banking system, and B, consolidate all of his rivals and take control of them. Hey, ka-ching, ka-ching for JP Morgan in the panic of 1907 that led to the Federal Reserve. So will the panic of 2023 lead to the CBDC of the future? Remains to be seen, but my magic 8-ball is all signs are pointing to yes on that one. But it even gets even worse. I mean, okay, one aspect of this, certainly the JP Morgan Chases and other major banking institutions that benefit from this, not only benefit directly from new customers, but oh, by the way, Jamie Dimon, who was just this past week, as even Reuters is reporting, JP Morgan must hand over CEO Dimon's records in Jeffrey Epstein lawsuit. Oh, what were you doing with Epstein around 2015 to 2019? You hand over your records. That might have been a big story in the financial banking world if this SVB thing didn't start and then the contagion spread to Credit Suisse, as we're starting to see right now, right? But it gets even worse because, as Sovereign Research points out, if SVB is insolvent, so is everyone else. If SVB failed due to losses in its portfolio of government bonds, because that's where it was trying to park all of its excess cash deposits that it was flush with, but oh my God, the Fed is raising rates. Who could have imagined that? Then pretty much every other institution is at risk too. Wells Fargo, for example, recently reported $50 billion. That's a lot larger than the $15 billion that SVB was reporting on January 19th in unrealized losses on its bond portfolio. The FDIC estimates unrealized losses among U.S. banks at roughly $650 billion, which is about the same size as the subprime losses in 2008. But here's the kicker. The FDIC runs a special fund called the Deposit Insurance Fund, or the DIF, to insure customer deposits at banks, including across the U.S., including SBV. But the DIF's balance right now is only around $128 billion versus that $650 billion of unrealized losses that they're talking about right now. But here's where it gets really crazy. Where does the DIF invest that $128 billion? In U.S. government bonds. The same bonds that, because they were tanking because of the rising interest rates, caused the SVB crisis in the first place. So don't forget who is the bottom layer of this scam. It's the Fed and what it has been doing. This has been pointed out by a lot of different writers recently. For example, Activist Post has a post up, Treasuries, risk-free or risk unlimited? And Reason.com has how the Fed broke Silicon Valley Bank. So don't forget who caused and engineered this crisis. Yes, the JP Morgans and the Jamie Dimons and others of the world, certainly. But the Fed is the bottom layer of this scam, and it is leading us into the CBDC nightmare. But I'll stop and take a breath, James, while you hand the reins back to you.
Many moons ago, and it was just before the Bush-Obama bankster bailout of 2008. Again, Obama was even, Goldman Sachs. Again, all these same exact players. I believe it was the FDIC and JP Morgan that basically colluded to cause a bank run and collapse on Washington Mutual, the late great bank up in the Pacific Northwest that I was a member of at the time. That's why it kind of stuck with me. James, I wonder if Pelosi maybe tipped the folks off that they should probably pull their money out of there. So I was quoting, and of course, media mavens would have recognized me quoting It's a Wonderful Life at the beginning of the episode. I will include a link to Corbett Report episode 170, The Coming Anastrophe. That would be the opposite of catastrophe, a little bit of good news injection into this look. But as Mark Crispin Miller also notes in that article, what of Noam Chomsky and Naomi Klein and Michael Moore? What have they said about CBDCs? Oh, it's crickets. Delicious crickets. Also, Sam Bankman Fraud could not be reached for comment.
Next, we will go to this clip from the Free Thought Project and their interview with Mira Tarita about her story and the Ukrainian kill list.
Welcome back to the Free Thought Project podcast, Free Thinkers. My name is Jason Bassler, and joining me today is the Free Thought Project editor-in-chief, Matt Agarist. So our guest this week is Russian national Mira Tarita. Mira is the official representative of the Foundation to Battle Injustice, an international human rights activist. She's also a writer, a publicist, and a philanthropist. In 2018, Mira was arrested and spent 888 days in custody in 11 different U.S. prisons. She experienced physical and psychological pressure, torture, and bullying on a daily basis while imprisoned, and she was only finally released in May of 2021. Mira is also the author of 2 biographical books, Hostage of the Country of Freedom, 888 Days in an American Prison, and Freedom of Thought, How to Survive Under Pressure, but has focused her full-time efforts on human rights violations, legal and financial assistance for judicial injustice, and supporting those who have suffered police brutality or political persecution.
Hi, Mira. Thank you for coming on today. I know you and I have talked multiple times, but this is actually like the first time that I'll be asking the questions. The last time we talked, it was about the injustices in American legal system and the military complex in general. But like, man, that almost seems like child's play compared to what's been going on the last year, on a global scale. Like, we're on the brink of potential nuclear war, monetary collapse, and what seems like some potentially very dark times ahead. But before we get into all that, why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself, your organization, the Foundation to Battle Injustice, and actually how you became a victim of this broken American legal system and quite literally lost your freedom for several years in this country.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me over. It's such a pleasure. And my name is Mira Tarita, as you heard, and I'm the head of the Foundation to Battle Injustice. But I will give you a little introduction. I used to live in the United States. I lived in the U.S. 8 years, and I loved it. I felt like it's my second home. I had friends. I had family. I was married there. And one day in 2018, I was arrested in Europe. I already moved back to Russia and I was arrested in Europe. And my arrest happened based on the U.S. warrant. I was extradited to the U.S. and I was prosecuted. I didn't get a chance to get a fair trial. And unfortunately, I had to sign a plea. And I got 3 years, 2.5 years actually, in federal prison in Aliceville in Alabama state. And even after my time was up, I served my sentence. I still was not released. There was different reasons why for some reason, authorities would not let me go, saying that they don't have my passports and I can't return home. Or then they decided that I've got COVID and things like that. So I stayed another 4 months in different jails and detention centers. And finally, I got back home in 2021 in May, end of May, and I was offered to head the Foundation to Battle Injustice, and I agreed. It's a nonprofit organization, and We work worldwide to address human rights violations, support civil activists. We provide legal assistance and financial support to victims of judicial injustice, police brutality, political persecution. As you may see, it happens a lot right now with the Kiev regime and so on. We've been working with the so-called kill list. We're trying to shut it down because we found out that there are 327 minors on that kill list whose data is public, which is absolute danger to those children, because it's basically like a pedophile menu. You open it and you see their pictures, their home address, their social networks. It's just crazy. And nobody allowed that organization, that website, to publish that information. And just 2 days ago, we had a conference, women's press conference, that was dedicated to harassment from the political and military leaders against women and what to do with this. So if you have any questions, you can ask and I will tell you more details about it.
Yeah. So last week, or that was actually this week, right? The acronym for your Foundation to Battle Injustice is unironically FBI. So I always want to say that when I see it, but no. So like the Foundation to Battle Injustice, they help to expose some of these pretty horrific things that NATO officials and military officers have been accused of doing, or officers have been accused of doing. Like, was this a bunch of like the victims of these people, and how did they expose it, and how did you guys go about like having a whole like meeting devoted to this?
I knew Tara Reid, who is the victim of Joseph Biden, who raped her. As she says, he was not convicted yet of it, but that's what she says, in 90s. And I mean, I think this story is pretty popular. Some people know about it, but unfortunately, she is so censored in the United States. Like, I think her biggest interview was with Sky News Australia. And that's about it. But like not long ago, she was on Tucker Carlson's show, and hopefully she will be heard, and the guilty will get punished. Because to me, it seems like when somebody doesn't get punished for their small crime, they feel like that's okay, and then they go on and commit bigger crime. So I believe Tara. It's my personal opinion. I do believe her, and I believe that this is what Joe Biden did to her. And because he wasn't stopped back then, we see what happened in Iraq. We see what's happening in Ukraine right now. And it's just like a hungry monster that wants more and more. And then in a conference, we had Juanita Broderick, who was assaulted by Bill Clinton in 70s. And she held that as a secret for over 30 years, and she exposed this information in 2016. And Juanita was threatened by Hillary Clinton back then that she can't talk about it. But then in 2016, when Hillary Clinton said that all the victims of sexual harassment and assault should come out, Juanita did that. She made a post on Twitter and she came out. And then we had Michela Marlatta. She is an Italian writer, and she was harassed by American general in Italy. In the city, they have army base, U.S. Army base, and Michela, she is married to a military guy who serves at that base, and one day the general just started harassing her, and Michela told him no. And after that, he turned her life into hell. He kicked her out of the base. She hardly can see her children. Her children go to school on that base, so she's not even allowed to go there and see her children. She's only allowed to go when they have some type of concerts, And the problem is that what we see, all these women, and it's not only the female problem, I think, because the harassment happens also from women toward men. It's just like at this specific conference, we didn't have men victims, but actually it happens to any gender. But in this case, what seems bizarre is that when victim gets censored, victim's career is ruined. Like Tara, she was at the Senate, and she was Senate aide, and she could have a great political career. But Joe Biden told her that she is nothing, and he made her life almost nothing if she wouldn't be enough strong to get up. But I mean, like he stopped her political career, and this is wrong when the aggressor gets away with his crime, and he can continue working, and he gets elected and re-elected, but the victim suffers the most. They get censored, their career is cancelled, and so on. You know, some of them, they just commit suicide, some of them break down really hard. And it shouldn't be that way either, because who has to be cancelled is the one who committed the crime.
Yeah, exactly. And there's no shortage of video of Biden actually sexually assaulting children, like on live TV. So
yeah.
I saw on your website, Mira, that you spoke about how this issue is still relevant in many countries. And I was actually floored to read that according to U.S. Defense Department documents, in 2022, reports of sexual harassment in the Army increased by 25.6%.
Yes.
That's insane. I don't think I've heard that statistic before. And it appears that the military has kind of alternative agendas right now when it comes to like the inclusion and acceptance of trans officers.
Exactly.
I think you just kind of referred to it, but the Me Too movement wasn't that long ago, and it really was a prominent movement that garnered a lot of support from the media, from various politicians. So it is surprising to me that I hadn't even heard that statistic, and there really hasn't been any focus placed on that, heinous crime, which is obviously still going on. But how did the conference go? Like, did you get much feedback or response afterward? Has anybody reached out to you? Is there going to be maybe another conference that's similar in the future?
This is a good question, because after that we got feedback, and we got some women telling me, especially in Russia, that was surprising, that women started calling me and telling me their stories. And it's very interesting that for many women, they don't even realize that they being harassed, because they think it's just the way how men show their interest in them, and they don't realize that this is disrespectful, this is violates their boundaries and things like that. So we're still getting feedback on it, and as a resolution for this conference, we agreed on creating a unity, I would say, that would protect women worldwide. I will explain you how that works. For example, in Russia, we also have this issue. Actually, 65% of Russian women was sexually harassed or assaulted through their life. And we do have cases where the guilty one doesn't get any punishment, and unfortunately the victims get shut down, they lose their jobs, and they get censored as well. And we figured out that it's not that easy to defend yourself or stand up for your rights or restore your rights in the same country. So I think it's a good option when, for example, a case like this happens in Italy, and the woman or man who suffered in Italy approach us and tells us what happened, and we stand up for that person. So that way we will make that person and the government of that country as a shame, because it is shameful when somebody worldwide is talking about what this or that politician did in your country, like there is no other issues but talk about somebody who can control himself. And that way the victim, I would say, she won't be facing all the consequences of standing up for her rights. Does it make sense?
Oh yeah, certainly. And I mean, that seems to be like the status quo, is silence anybody who, who challenges authority or calls attention to any crimes in authority, including sexual harassment and including claims of children, right?
Yeah.
And we can shift gears a little bit with that. Like there was, like speaking of children, this girl that you reached out to me last year, and the one who was exposing the crimes of Russia against the Donetsk region and how they were shelling them. I'm going to butcher her name. It's Faina Savinkova.
Yes, Faina Savinkova.
Yeah, she's a 14-year-old child who was just writing about her experience, right, in Ukraine and how she was being oppressed by the Kyiv government, and she was added to this kill list, like the Ukrainian kill list that like calls for her death and celebrates when people on that list get eradicated for journalism, right? And now we've seen that the NBC mainstream journalist, this guy Keir Simmons, went to Ukraine and just presented facts, like saying that it's not very realistic that Zelensky and Ukrainian forces could, help to or could take Crimea from Russia, right? That's all he said, and he got added to that kill list too.
Yeah, and
the mainstream media here in America hasn't said a word about it. Like we have a major big journalist, who's added to a freaking kill list, who we're funding. And they're calling for, for his death, and who also puts children on this list and calls for their death. And here we are. The media here is silent. It's pretty damn crazy. So would you mind giving us like an update back to Faina, like on how she's like moving forward? Was she ever able to get like some mainstream media coverage here? Like, I know we were trying to like help get her on Tucker Carlson. Has that ever materialized or anything?
We're still working on it. Faina's name was actually mentioned in Tucker's show, which is a step forward, definitely. Faina doesn't stop. She opened her own show, and she streams it for United States. She has another show that's streamed around Europe, mainly to friends. And she's continuing her fight. She's not putting her arms down. She's trying to get her message to, oh gosh, I forgot his name, Roger Waters. There it goes. She's trying to pass him a message because he's also on a kill list. And we thought that it would be we tried everything. We wrote to the UN. We wrote to the Children's UN Foundation, UNICEF, asking them to do something about it. They did nothing but condemn. Then we wrote to the Cloudflare, the hosting provider of Mirotvorets, telling them, hey guys, look what you're doing. This is a criminal website. 12 journalists, for example, were already murdered. They got children's personal data. Please shut it down. Please stop providing them service. No response. So we were hoping that maybe if somebody very important like Roger Waters or Oliver Stone would write a personal letter to Cloudflare. Maybe Cloudflare will be concerned about coming lawsuit or something, and will hear somebody that has a name. So maybe one day that would work. But to me, it really seems that apparently there is really somebody's government standing behind that website. I mean, there is no way, if it's just a simple human being's crazy idea to do this, that it just like American government will allow it exist. As I know on my personal experience how American government works, usually, at least back then, U.S. used to care about its citizens. I see what's happening now, that U.S. Government cares more about what's happening outside of its country. But I hope somebody will have a clear, sober mind to see that your own citizens' personal data is located on that website. It's time to do something about it and show that you really care.
That's a great point. And for maybe some of our younger audience listeners, Roger Waters is the founder and musician behind Pink Floyd, and he's been incredibly active in the anti-war movement. In fact, the Rage Against the War Machine protest that I went to in Washington, D.C., he was essentially the headliner. At the very end, they played a video of his message, denouncing the whole Russia-Ukraine war. And he's also spoken out about Julian Assange numerous times over the years during concerts and performances. So he's certainly an ally in our corner. On an interview you did in late December of last year with Tara Reid, you mentioned that one of the people on the Ukraine kill list is actually a 9-year-old girl who was placed on it for participating in the annual Victory Day parade, which is like the celebration that happens annually in May 9th in Moscow. And apparently you're on this kill list too. Can you talk about the 9-year-old and maybe some of the other teens who are on this kill list? Also, like, how seriously do you take being on this kill list? Like, has it affected your work or travel at all?
Yes. When we were searching for any other children on the kill list, like what happened, Faina wrote me on social network, Faina Sevenkova. She wrote me because she also writes books. She has several books published. Her books published also in Canada and France. Like, she publishes her books worldwide. She writes war fairy tales. And wrote me as to her colleague writer, because I also wrote a couple of books, and we started talking about book writing. And then she told me, I'm on kill list. And I was in shock because I heard of Mirotvorets before, about kill list before. And I asked my colleagues to go ahead and check if there are any other minors on it. And when they got back to me, they said that they found 327 children. And so they looked to what countries those children are from. They looked how many girls, how many boys, and what they are accused of. And we found out that the youngest girl is 9 years old, and she got on kill list for participating in the Victory Day parade. And then majority of those children end up on kill list because they went on vacation to Crimea with their parents. So, what makes me feel more insane, it's like how sick you gotta be to go to social networks and look for somebody's pictures from Crimea, and then like post their personal data on website. It's like, it's just sick. It just makes me feel so sick that somebody can just go and search for you if you had a vacation in Crimea, go look through your picture in your swimming suit, how you're having fun with your family, with your husband, with your child, and then post personal data of your child. This is really sick. And then when I joined Faina in her fight against the kill list, we had a press conference in Moscow about it, and 2 hours after press conference, my name ended up on kill list as well. Of course, I feel more alert now, and I do care about my safety more than before, but I think it's not only the kill list what did it to me, but the fact that my friend Daria Dugina, who went in April to Donbass, she went to Azovstal, 2 months later, few months later, not 2 months, she went in April, and then she was killed in August. And that made me really concerned because we found out that her car was exploded, one of the first ones, and I asked my colleagues to check information on her page on Mirotvorets, on kill list, and they told me that her picture is crossed and it says liquidated on it. And I was surprised, how did they know about it so quickly? Like, how did they find out about it? It was not on media yet, and they already had her picture crossed and marked her as liquidated. And that made me feel that they do have some sort of connection to what happened. Somehow they got informed about it fast enough to put that mark on her, on a page where her personal data was at. And of course, that made me more concerned. And of course, I don't feel comfortable that there is some information. But I mean, in my case, there is not much personal on it, I would say. So my safety, yes, it makes me worried. But what's posted on it doesn't worry me at all.
Well, good. That is absolutely mind-blowing that there are 320 children on this website, and this website celebrates and calls for their execution for challenging whatever status quo message that it's trying to purvey, the pro-Ukrainian Kiev regime message. And absolutely no one says anything about that in the mainstream media here in the United States. You know, like that. I find that incredible, especially the ones that can, you know, they ostensibly care about the freedom of press and journalism. You know, we don't have anybody, not even like the alternative ACLU, like the Barry Weiss, you know, how she has this this new free press operation that is supposed to care about stuff like this, and no one's talking about this kill list except for alternative media journalists. And I mean, Elon Musk was put on it a few months ago, right? And he actually tweeted out his picture on it, and if I'm not mistaken, right, that did happen, right? Elon Musk was
Eva Bartlett posted it, but then his profile was removed so fast, and he asked for the link, and when she went to look for that link, it was gone already. So unfortunately, he didn't get that proof. But I think if like they realized what they've done, like if they will keep his personal data, their website definitely will be shut down.
Well, I mean, it's hosted on Cloudflare, which is unbelievable. Cloudflare pulled Alex Jones access, right? They canceled Alex Jones' account for Cloudflare is like a backup proxy server that helps you stave off like DDoS attacks and any kind of attacks on your website by hosting it through a proxy server and then delivering the content that way. And Alex Jones had that for InfoWars, and they canceled him because of, you know, allegedly he was saying all this wild stuff. But somehow this website that celebrates the liquidation of journalists for questioning the establishment regime in Ukraine is allowed to stay on Cloudflare. And, you know, obviously we're against censorship of any kind, but this is calling for, this isn't freedom of press. This is direct threats to personal safety. You know, like anybody who speaks out against them, they want them dead. And then they say liquidated on their website when that happens. And it's utterly mind blowing that hasn't been pulled off or shut down or anything like that. You know, like it's just, we're in a bubble over here in the United States when it comes to media and what's actually happening in the Ukraine.
This next clip is from Patrick Lancaster and some of his on-the-ground reports in Donetsk from earlier this week.
I'm Patrick Lancaster, and right now we're in the Petrovka district of Donetsk, and yet again this district has come under Ukrainian shelling. Right behind me you see this apartment building that took a direct hit, as you can see, and basically all of the belongings to the people that live in this apartment was knocked out here in the yard. And unfortunately, and we can hear some of the fighting in the distance, and unfortunately there was a 14-year-old boy that was injured. We're told here on the ground it got a serious injury to his leg, and he's been taken to the hospital via an ambulance. We're going to be here on the scene, see what else is going on here, see what information we can find. Maybe we'll visit him in the hospital, maybe we won't. We'll have to see how the day plays out, because we don't make the news, we just show you the news. We hear there's other shelling, there's other apartments and homes that have been hit in this area. We might go to those. We're just going to have to see how the day plays out. We can see here now there's gas workers working on the pipes here, repairing some of the shrapnel holes from the gas leak that was caused. And we can see some of the other workers and residents up here working on their home and getting rid of some of the blown up debris. So we're going to continue to bring you everything here on the ground. So please like, subscribe, share. And remember, we're totally independent crowdfunded journalists. You can support our work with the link on the screen or in the description. Добрий день. Можно пару слов? Что произошло здесь?
Ну, я в момент взрыва не был, я позже приехал.
Ага.
Ну, судя по всему, вот снаряд летел.
And we can see how there's so many children that live in this apartment building. I mean, we were even told by the woman how it wasn't the first time this apartment building's been hit. Just horrible. Something needs to be done.
Ковры выбросили, может там и было. Коврами все бросили туда. Хорошо, спасибо.
Но понимаю, какое оружие? Может, мина, или град, или какой?
Вот, смотрите, вон осколок. Смотрите, возле резиновые колеса. Опуститесь, по-моему. Да, не, вот.
О! Да. Вот.
О, 155-й.
155?
Да.
Это западный, да?
Ну, это в М3 семерки.
Ага.
Это... Они имеют вот очень характерный, очень широкий поясок. В советских снарядах такого нету.
Ага. Да, это вроде западное оружие. Да. Еще.
Лестница нужна, да? Вообще да. Лестница у меня есть длинная, да? Ну как длинная, метр.
And as you see, we were just pointed out these shrapnel pieces from the father-in-law up there. And these appear to be, under the best of our abilities to identify them. If we're wrong, comment below, or if you know some information we don't. But these appear to be a M549 155 millimeter shell that came down here on this civilian apartment building. And this M549 is supplied to Ukraine by the West. So Western ammunition again is coming down on civilian homes and apartment buildings. This is a fact. The West is supplying Ukraine with weapons they are shelling civilians with. There is no question about this. This isn't the first time. This isn't the second time. This is a continuous thing. Ukraine is shelling civilians with the weapons that the West is supplying it. Your tax dollars are supplying weapons to Ukraine that are shelling civilians. Please like, share, and subscribe. Remember, we're totally independent crowdfunded journalists. You can support our work with the link on the screen or in the description. Now we're going to go get some information from other parts of Donetsk and do our best to find out what else we can find for you today, because the Western mainstream media won't show you these facts. Oh, we can hear the shrapnel coming down now. Oh, there's the smoke. Obviously, that's incoming shelling from Ukrainian positions in Mariinka here on Alexandrovka, landing very close to us. Oh, there's another one. I'm Patrick Lancaster, and right now we are in the Kievsky district of Donetsk, and you can see behind me there was not long ago an artillery attack here on this school number 58. Thank God there was no children here, because the Donetsk People's Republic and Russian authorities have for the last year done distance learning to keep their children out of harm's way, because virtually every school has been hit by shelling in most areas of Donetsk and the surrounding areas. Now, we've been here before when Ukraine has opened fire on this exact school. We've shown you this in the past. It's happened several times. Unfortunately, today, 2 workers here were injured. Right now, we're going to have talk to some of the employees of the school and see what they have to say, and see what the situation really is on the ground.
Next, let's take a look at this clip from Rebunked News with Scott Armstrong and his interview with Dr. Lee Merritt.
I'm like, if you remember, there was a video of the 20, let's see, No, it was 1992, the Barcelona Olympics, and then there was another one in 2012 of the Olympics, wherever that one was. But the 1992 Barcelona Olympics showed several things. They showed these people dressed up like this so-called SARS-CoV-2 virus that they want to say with blue, that they showed you that creepy blue ball with all the spikes that make it really scary, which is only CGI. It doesn't exist in reality like that. It's not it's not electromicroscopic video. It's just CGI. But they went back and they have a similar thing. They have these people dressed in those costumes in 1992, which tells you how long they've been planning this. Yeah. But the other things they show you in that video, besides slave ships and slaves, I mean, like, that's really have something to do with the Olympics. They show you this black thing that shoots out, this like a ribbon, black ribbon that shoots out of this crowd of blue balls. That is exactly what the German parasite guys that have been studying parasites in cancer, that is like right out of a microscopic video that they have. I have a segment of it on my website. That is exactly what it looks like. It's a parasite coming out of your red blood cell. The other thing they show you in that video, and many people have probably watched it, so they know what I'm talking about. There's this brown, weird pillow-like thing. It's like a crescent shape, and it's huge. It takes like 10 people or something to carry it in over their heads. What the heck is that? I thought, now, I know they're telling us things. What are they telling us now? And I looked at that, and I found it in a book on parasitology. It's a special stain, and it's a parasite. It's called Trypanosoma cruzi. I think, and I've been saying this for a while, I think it's potential that is either in the vaccine, probably in the vaccine. So Trypanosoma cruzi is a parasite that, interestingly, we've worried about it for a long time. That's the only reason I know about it, is because it's one of those things we've been worried about coming across the southern border. And I used to work right on the Mexican border. And it's a parasite that when you first get infected, within 2 weeks, it can give you sudden cardiac death. Ta-da, what are we saying? Yeah. And then later on, it sets in and can give you myocarditis, cardiomyopathy, all the heart things that we're also seeing. So I think there's a real reason to look for that. And we don't generally screen our blood supply for that. They knew that too. They knew that going in. People that are paying attention, they knew that. So I think we're dealing with parasites, this reduced graphene oxide, and the other stuff I mentioned. And I think the ultimate, what it's doing, the reason it's causing clotting is because graphene oxide is an electron stealer. It steals negative charges. And the way that you keep your blood from clotting is there are negative charges all through the blood vessels, through the lining of the vessels, all around the red blood cells and the other cells, so that they all repel each other. And so they just have this beautiful laminar flow. You put graphene oxide through that, and they knew this, by the way, in the basic research. That's what I'm saying. You can go way back in time. That's all over the place. They knew there was a problem. Also with the cationic lipids. Those are the lipids that they made for the coating of this thing. That probably is the real thing that they're using. But it's the outside coating. They say the genetic material is in the inside, like the core of an apple, and the outside is just lipids to get it into the parts they want it to go to. That is also damaging because they couldn't make it work. They could not, there was no literature that said they got this toxicity out of that before you see this roll out. You just see it's really good for your immunogenicity, but gosh, we got this toxicity we can't get rid of. Boom. Now we're making millions of doses.
Yeah. So. It's funny. So, it's just so crazy. So it's really funny. I was actually at the gym last night. I was listening to an old interview of yours, and you were talking about the hydrogel. And just a few minutes later, I was like on the stair climber, and I look up, and there's a shampoo commercial, and in the shampoo commercial, it flashed across the screen, hydrogel. And I'm like, what? This is like a crazy, very crazy synchronicity. But at the same time, I think that's not something that should be glossed over because, people have maybe a kind of an innocuous view of what this hydrogel, quote unquote, is. And so can you maybe tell us a little bit more about what we're looking at in terms of this type of hydrogel?
Right. And so this is interesting stuff. And I will give credit to Karen Kingston. This is the kind of stuff I just can't bring myself to do, is look at old patents. Okay. She does that. That's what she used to do for Pfizer. And she's good at that. So I came at this whole thing from the clinical aspect of what we're seeing with parasites after you take the vaccine. She came at it from looking at these old patents and showing that there's something that acts like a parasite, but it's artificial. And it's this genetically engineered smart hydrogel. Okay. So hydrogel, all that is a polymer, basically like a plastic, very, very, a polymer that absorbs water. So soft contact lenses are hydrogel, right? Mm. But smart hydrogel is somehow more than that. And it's able to change its shape by wavelength. Now, and this is where it gets to why I think what she's describing, and this is what I said to her at lunch one day. I said, I think I've been trying to flesh out this whole, what's the one theory that puts it all together that fits the disease and the vaccine toxicity. And I think this is it. So it clearly was not an airborne disease that was highly contagious, because if it were, why were there people living with people that got it and they didn't get it in China? And they traced 10,000 or 1 million people that, or maybe it was 10 million. They traced a lot of Chinese that were in the household of a sick person, and not one of them transmitted it to somebody else. So, and the other cities weren't shut down in China. So what's going on here? Let's suppose, and this is the point about this hydrogel. This is my metaphor. If I stab you in the heart, or I shoot you in the heart, and you come into emergency room barely alive, leaking from your heart, it doesn't tell the people there what happened to you, right? It's just, they know you've got a problem and they know what the problem is. It doesn't speak to causation. Now, we saw people that had a problem, and the problem had to do with them losing sodium and getting really dehydrated and getting very sick very quickly. It has to do with the what's called the ACE2 pathway. Mm-hmm. It's just a pathway in the body like an insulin receptor. This is an ACE2 receptor, and it regulates blood pressure, and it does a bunch of other things. Well, it turns out that this smart hydrogel that they devised, and this is the patents show this, they have a smart hydrogel that has two conformations. It has a diamond conformation and a triangle conformation, and I can't remember which one is which, but one of them fits into the ACE2 pathway and blocks it and can cause all this stuff to happen, presumably, and the other one doesn't. So let's just suppose I want to have a pandemic, and I want to orchestrate it on exactly the date I want to orchestrate it, right? How would you do that? One of the great ways to do it is you could spread around this hydrogel, okay, in this, and you put it in kind of some kind of liquid form, and you touch. We have a picture, for example. I think the Epoch Times had this, of this woman in China in a computer store, opening up computers, touching the keys, closing them, opening, touching, closing, opening, touching, closing, not looking at the computers. What's that all about? Well, that would be the kind of thing you do to spread a contact poison. And I will tell you that in the history of our bioweapons programs and the Soviets and everybody's, contact poisons are a big thing that they've looked at over the decades. So we know something about that. We taught the South Africans about this stuff, so we know something about this. So you spread this stuff around, and it's lipophilic, meaning it gets into your skin and it can get in your mucous membranes. You get something on your hand, you always get it in your mouth and your eyes and everywhere. I mean, you can't avoid it. So what happens is these guys in Wuhan, let's say, they get all this stuff in them, but it doesn't make them sick because it's not the right configuration. Then on the day of the first victim, which was October 19th, just happens to be the day they turn on the 5G. Now, 5G is a series of wavelengths, but they embedded in that, they can then allow a certain wavelength to be transmitted that can now convert within you those pieces of hydrogel into the one that makes you sick. It's easy. And that would also be true of the vaccine. Now, there's other things you could put in there. I'm just writing it up for my personal Substack, because I got, and this is a point. I didn't get demonetized from Substack when I was talking about viruses and CRISPR and genetic engineering. They didn't mind me talking about that. The minute I started talking about wavelength-induced disease, boom, I was a non-person. They sent all the money to my people that had paid me. They sent it all back. Wow. And they said, you can't play.
You're saying Substack. Substack did that to you?
Yep.
Wow.
Yep. In fact, Steve Kerr says you're the only person I know that's happened to.
Yeah,
but it started when I started talking about the Kosnachev effect and how you can produce disease electromagnetically. And see, that's where I think this goes. Now, but the good news here is, for some reason, that hydrogel seems to act like real parasites. There's a reason that they do not want us talking about anti-parasitic meds.
Yep.
So that is the good news here. So I think that's what happened. I think they turned on an artificial poison. They created what looked like a disease pandemic. That explains the people just dropping over on their face early on, because they may have overdone it a little bit, and then they backed it off so it didn't look so obvious. And then when it came time to, this was a problem reaction solution. They knew the solution they wanted to give us was a universal vaccine. The problem they gave us in order to get to that was if you're going to do something like that, why create two pathogens when you can just create one? So they used the same thing that's in the vaccine, probably in a little different formulation, to start this whole ball rolling, to give us a freaky looking disease that then they piggybacked and they made it look worse than it was, because they added false testing, right? To make it, they took the flu test, the 250,000 that we would have had dead in America that they called flu, which really even wasn't flu, but they called it that, and they converted that to COVID. So now they have all these numbers that make it look like everybody's got this bad disease. And that's what got people scared. And when people got scared, what happened? They ran out and took the universal vaccine.
Yeah.
They tried this before, by the way. They've tried to get it. You can look in the literature about these guys talking about the wanting to get a universal vaccine. They wanted it. They tried with HIV.
Or just it's just mRNA in general. They want that to be the next iteration. The next.
Well, even before they talked about that.
Okay.
Yeah, when AIDS was out, when they created AIDS, the AIDS epidemic. That was an attempt to get a universal vaccine, but they couldn't infect enough people and get enough people scared. Then with the H1N1, same thing. That was like 2000, whatever, 9. And they tried that, and it made a lot of people sick in Europe from a bad vaccine, but they didn't get it universal. They couldn't get enough people to do it. And this one they did. This one they succeeded. So that's what I think this is about. And that's why parasite and the treatment of parasites is so important, both for our natural and the man-made.
Yeah, and I definitely want to get into that, because I think it's so fascinating, especially the ties to cancer. But before we go too far, like if anybody out there, if you haven't been listening, you're like, well, that's crazy. Check this out, guys. This is literally Popular Mechanics. So this is the next iteration of cell phone technology. And it says, according to Popular Mechanics, look, guys, headline, scientists want to use people as antennas to power 6G. What? We're still dealing with 5G, and they're already talking about 6G, and I'm sure they have 10, 20G plans. But this is like in your face. Again, they're telling you what they're doing.
And this is IOB, Internet of Bodies.
Yeah.
Everybody knows of IoT, Internet of Things. But trust me, during this whole outbreak, Merck, they got out of the vaccine game. And I thought, wow, that's kind of a good step for Merck. How did they suddenly have an ethical moment of crisis?
I remember that. Yeah.
They got out because they bought, what was it called? It was called In-Brain Technologies or something. And it was exactly that. It's to create an Internet of Bodies. Now, if there are people out there saying this is all hogwash, I recommend that they read about opsins and optogenetics. Okay. So when I started thinking this was genetic, but there were a couple things that bothered me. But I started, I thought, I was given a piece of paper that was anonymous. It was about 6 pages. It was obviously written by some scientific, smart people that knew about genetic sequencing. And they claimed, I have a feeling this was Chinese and that this is again, disinformation, but it's what I learned from it that's important. They claimed that they'd sequenced the stuff in these vials, in these different vaccines, and they found mRNA, but no what they call open reading frames. In other words, it could not be making the spike protein. So what's it making? It's making lots of choppy little RNAs that's going to make people sick. And there's only one guy that could do this, and that's Feng Zhang at the Zhang Labs. In other words, they wrote this to try and finger this guy, Feng Zhang. Okay, so I never heard of him, but he's a big guy in genetics, and he's got his lab, the Zhang Lab at MIT. So he's a big young guy, and he's touted to be the father of CRISPR technology, the kind of technology we use for genetic modification. But you go on it. So then I traced it over there and I started reading the Zhang Lab website. Well, the first thing it says is he's on there saying, well, when it comes to genetic modification, we actually can't really, we can do gene knockdown. We can do gene knockout where they just take away some property of the genetic sequence, but we can't do precise insertion. And I said, what? I mean, that's what they're talking about. That's what they're claiming they're doing all over the place. Here's the guy they told was the father of CRISPR, and he's saying you can't do that. So then I said, okay, I'm going to look up this guy's PhD. And I did. And his PhD is in optogenetics. And what that means is you use wavelength to change cellular function. Now, here's what the next level, that's step one. When he was doing his PhD, that was basic optogenetics. But now we have biomodulation and optogenetics. So here's what they're doing. This is, I'll put it in really simple terms. There are these chemicals called opsins. We have them in our eye. We use them for just a couple things in the human body. It's chemicals that respond to certain wavelengths. We have them in the eye so we can see color, like rhodopsin, and we have them in our body till we can be in a circadian rhythm of sunlight and dark. Okay, but and so they're not very strong and they don't do much. But in bacteria, they're very strong. So what they're doing is they're hybridizing mammalian and bacterial opsins, injecting them into animals, and they can precisely control, they call it precise spatiotemporal kinetic ability. They can actually precisely control the effect of wavelength on your brain and on your heart. Okay. Now, the heart's really got me going, because think about what we're seeing, all these young people dropping over and Damar Hamlin, for example. Yep. Now, one of the things that is to be said here is that we know you can transmit disease with electromagnetic radiation, but this is precisely not just even disease. This is like drilled down from that. So they say in this literature, we can create a cardiac arrhythmia with this technology in mice. We've never done it in humans, but we can create it in mice, and we can resolve a cardiac arrhythmia in mice. In other words, they're trying to tell you they're doing it for the good of mankind, where they're really making a very undetectable weapon. Now, what they have to do to make this work is they inject you with these opsins, and then they subject you to a wavelength that would cause sudden cardiac death. If you look at young people that are dropping over, the number one reason for that is sudden cardiac arrhythmia. Before COVID, I mean, that's just if you're a young person, you suddenly hit the ground dead, like that famous basketball player years ago, that's from an arrhythmia generally. Now, suppose I could secretly create one by just blasting you with a wavelength, but I have to inject you with something first. Okay, ergo, the universal vaccine. Now let's go to this Travis Scott concert. What happened there? They wanted to tell you people were getting crushed, but that doesn't appear to be the case. I looked right away. I started listening to every firsthand report I could find, and they all talked about how people dropped over and they were just trying to get room out to do CPR and things. It wasn't that they were being crushed. They couldn't get the thing to stop, and they had all this stuff going on. Well, they all had to be vaccinated. They walked through this tube, and then they walked into this area where they're doing strobe lights and all sorts of sound, i.e. wavelength. And what these things do is they respond to pulsations of light and to wavelength. So you can think that's all crazy talk, but I'm going to tell you, this is the leading edge of bioweapons research, I suspect. They don't call it that, but that is... It's like you heard about the CIA with their ice gun the cardiac that they could, or
the heart attack gun.
Heart attack gun. Yeah. They claimed that was a real deal. They had it at the church report in the 70s.
70s, yeah.
That's the 70s. Okay. Trust me, the guys doing this, they're decades ahead of us in technology. Yeah. They know things about the world we don't know, but that is the latest information. In fact, you're the first person to get this off my thinking cap, because I've just been researching this last week.
Awesome. Well, thank you for the
breaking news.
Yeah, thank you for the exclusive, Dr. Lee. That's fantastic. So, I feel like the way the parasite thing relates to cancer, I wanted to talk about that, but I definitely want to leave some time to discuss the lab leak thing. So, let's hit that just real quick. So I've looked into this quite a bit. The idea of, like, I've heard it characterized as turbo cancer, right? There's
after the vaccine.
Yeah, like Dr. Charles Hoff, British Columbian physician, talks about how, whereas before it'd be like, a certain percentage of people would present with stage 4, where now it's 2/3. All of a sudden, it's just like 2/3 of his patients are presenting with stage 4 cancer when there's a positive cancer diagnosis. So something has shifted, something's changed, something dramatic has happened. And I just really was hoping that, and then, I hear you talk about how it all ties back to the parasite aspect of this. Can you just kind of connect those dots between the shots, the parasites, and the cancer?
Right. So Dr. Hoff's right. I mean, why would a disease suddenly change its stripes? We've lived with cancer for the last 100 years. Why did it suddenly go turbo? And it just suddenly went turbo at the time we let this vaccine out, right? Well, I was paying attention. So I was in contact with, a lot of these active duty medical doctors that were telling me things before they even came out in the whistleblowing things in Congress. So I was kind of getting some information about this. And and I was hearing this, that people would, we always, when I was in the military, we'd see cancer every once in a while in a young healthy guy. He'd show up, have a lump in his testicle, and they'd send him to the urologist and they'd take care of it, done deal. But it was one cancer, like Dr. Hoff is saying. It was like an early stage of one lesion. Okay. But now what they're seeing is these guys are showing up after this vaccine, and they get MRIs, and they've got metastases, what they call metastases, everywhere. So you either have to believe that cancer has suddenly changed how it's presenting, or there's something we're doing that's causing this. Mm-hmm. Now, who are these guys? I mean, this is what made me start thinking. The military is a group of guys that are in great shape. They've got a great immune system. They're healthy guys, but they're out snooping and prooping through the brush in Camp Lejeune, and they're overseas in Afghanistan, drinking the water and eating in souks, eating in marketplaces in Morocco and places. And so they're not necessarily immune from getting parasites. We all have parasites, even in the United States. That's a falsehood to think it's third world country problem. Yeah. But these guys probably have more than the average because of what their lifestyle is, right? But they were keeping it in check because their immune system has been good. But what this vaccine, so-called vaccine, does, it's not a vaccine at all, but what it does is, and we have this again, there's absolute proof of this. There's studies coming out showing how it put their new antigens showing up on immune system cells that they don't know what it's going to do, but they said clearly we're changing people's immune system. So the way parasites work in the body is all your life you accumulate parasites. And mother parasites can be microscopic. They don't have to be worms in your gut. They can be things that are invisible to the naked eye. And most of them probably are, because my friends that are surgeons don't see a bunch of worms in people's guts when they open them up, usually. Now, they don't usually open up the place they live, but nonetheless, they'd see them. So this is usually microscopic stuff. But the mother parasite puts out 20,000 to 200,000 eggs a day. And then those things usually pass out of you, but some of them get encysted and they make these little cysts in the body. And that's what your immune system spends its time guarding. Now, when you're 20, you've got a great immune system, no problem guarding that. But this is kind of like the Roman Empire. As it got bigger, there weren't enough soldiers to guard the empire. And as you get too many cysts of parasites in you, you don't have enough immune system to guard it all. So without the vaccine, in normal parlance, what happens is as you get into your 30s, 40s, and 50s, we start seeing people with autoimmune disease. Their immune system gets on high burn because they've got too many parasites in egg sacs. We see people with neurologic problems. And now we're finding out that multiple sclerosis, 10 out of 10 dead patients, autopsied by Dr. McDonald, parasites in the brain and spinal cord. Okay. And then if you get past that age, you get into the cancer age. Then you get cancer because now they're starting to break out and your body can't keep them in check. And we see them as metastases because egg sacs look identical to what we call cancer metastases. Well, that's what's going on. And so there's a German group in they're like a big institute or university. And they've been talking about this for years. I was on a podcast with a PhD Egyptian parasitologist, and they're like the kings of parasitology because there's so many parasites and they know about them. If you and I lived in Egypt, we'd have been on chronic parasite prophylaxis our whole life, probably. Okay. We should have been here, but they lied to us and told us it was a third world problem. But that's what's happening. So, and I've had people that, like, here's a classic case. I mean, here's a guy that he wouldn't listen to his wife. So he took 2 vaccines and then a booster. And then he developed leukemia. Now, his wife is one of my podcast members. So she'd heard the whole thing. She'd heard about all this stuff. She didn't take the vaccine. But once he got this, he got cancer and he was having all these problems. She said, would you listen to me now? And would you try this? So I have a thing about what to do for vaccine remorse on my website. Well, so they did that, and it involved using parasite medicines in a cyclic manner so that you actually don't take it all the time. You take it and then you have a break, take it, break. And lo and behold, after a while, he did fine. He had no leukemia and his doctors are amazed. Now, I'm not saying that to say this is the only protocol that works, but there's something about parasites, and parasites are cancer. Again, anybody that doesn't believe that, just go to PubMed, get into the public, because otherwise you'll get trash all over the internet. Sure. But go to the PubMed site and National Library of Medicine, or NIH.gov, and just search ivermectin and parasites. Or nitazoxanide and parasites. Ivermectin and cancer, nitazoxanide and cancer. And it's all over the place.
Interesting.
And again, you see, why don't they want us to know this? Yeah, they want to kill us with this whole thing and depopulate the population, I think, and they didn't want us to catch on too early. But they also know that if we really understand this, it's going to take the pharmaceutical companies down. And I'm not suicidal just because I can say that, because in years past, anybody threatened them, man, they died. Any doctor talked out and they died. So,
but doctors, whistleblowers, absolutely. Yeah.
You know, you've heard about remdesivir, and Dr. Artis makes a big deal about how, and he's thankfully has told people the truth about it. And, you know, we knew it from the literature that it's a bad drug. Why are they using it? But in order to make it look at least a little bit effective, modicum of effectiveness, they mixed it with 2 other drugs. And, you know, one in one study, one in another study. The first one was ivermectin. And the second one was nitazoxanide, a drug I had never heard of until now. But it turns out the NIH knew that it worked for this kind of thing, and they were giving it. So, you know, they've lied to us through their teeth for decades, and don't trust them with anything. I have people that say, you know, okay, I get it. Don't take the COVID vaccine, but how about a shingles shot? You know, they're, you know, little old ladies like me, and they say, how about a shingles shot? And I said, ma'am, please, I don't even buy toothpaste from these people anymore. Do not take an injection from them, because if they won't tell you what's in this, how do you know they're telling you the truth of anything they're injecting you with?
Exactly.
Last but not least, I will leave you with this clip with Ryan, Cristian, and Whitney Webb, as well as a clip from Ryan discussing their fundraising event this coming Monday the 20th. See you next week for another episode of the Independent Review.
A very important article. We've talked about in the past about CIA and Mossad link surveillance systems, specifically Carbine 911, during our election special that Whitney and I did during 2020 discussions, and trying to predict, theorizing about where this would go, a lot of which actually came to pass. She recently came out with a new article in regard to a company called Gabriel, and this seems to be the continual extension, the creep of the pre-crime direction. So inviting her on to have a talk about this. Whitney Webb, how are you today?
Hey, doing well. Good to be back on TLAV as always.
Well, it's always a pleasure to have you. This is a good article too. I think that this is, as we were saying before, something that doesn't get enough attention. You know, I mean, really, as you know, we've said many times before, to me, it doesn't really matter. I mean, it does make a difference, obviously, depending on what government, their governments, some are worse than others, in my opinion, but really whatever government is having an outsized influence on policy or surveillance within another country, specifically, you know, the U.S. where I am residing, that makes me very uncomfortable. But specifically with the Israeli government and the history around what's been done in foreign policy and domestic, it makes me really concerned. So, you know, start wherever you want, really. We can talk about what we talked about previously, or, you know, just wherever you want to begin here, because this is a kind of a gigantic topic.
Yeah, it is a gigantic topic. So basically, I guess I'll just start off with the point that this is, as I see it, sort of a team up of CIA and Israeli intelligence, or American and Israeli intelligence. Maybe it's better to say. And if you look through the history, like, you know, in the books I put out last year, for example, I talk a lot about how, American intelligence and organized crime, they team up, and then the state of Israel is created not long after that. And a lot of the same organized crime figures that had teamed up with the CIA were really involved with arming the paramilitary groups that later create the state of Israel. And those groups, of course, turn into the Haganah, turn into the IDF and all of that. And so all of these same entities have been swimming around each other for a very long time. And then you have the CIA and Israeli intelligence collaborating in a lot of illicit activities and past intelligence link scandals, like Iran-Contra, for example, intimately involving both. Okay, so as we've talked about in the past pretty extensively, Iran-Contra is the period of time where the U.S. national security state arguably, they tried to do this a little bit before as well, but it became really obvious that they were trying to essentially create sort of a pre-crime system in the event of a vaguely defined national emergency as part of these continuity of government protocols, right? And this has always been very dependent on data mining. Even back then in the 80s, when the world wasn't nearly as digitized or as dependent on digital technologies as it is today. They were still, using what they could, the capabilities they had back then to profile people, decide if anyone might be a threat to the state in the event of one of these emergencies. And as we've talked about before, you could be put on that particular list for attending a protest, not paying your taxes on time. It didn't necessarily apply to people who were showing overt violence. It was, people who were essentially thought criminals and stuff back then.
Right.
And Israel was really involved with the development of that database. And a lot of this is intimately tied up with the Promise software scandal, which happened at around the same time. And of course, involved both Israeli and U.S. intelligence. And on the Israeli intelligence side, people may be familiar with Robert Maxwell's outsized involvement in that. But essentially, this was the same software used to profile dissidents. And that was one of the reasons that Robert Maxwell was selling the Promise software to all these countries around the world, specifically in Latin America, where they were using Promise as a means to sort of like supercharge their dissident elimination efforts as part of Operation Condor and things like that. So there's a long history of pre-crime in the U.S. and pretty much every time you follow how that's developed from, this point where I'm talking about in the 80s up until now, it's Israeli and American intelligence working together. So I just want to make that point really clear. Like, I'm not being like, this is all one guy and, our intelligence agencies are very much complicit in this, and it's been a collaborative thing for decades. So that's why it's important to sort of have that context. And the other thing too, in which I cite in the article, there was this article in the British Journal of Criminology that was basically trying to explain what pre-crime is, and it made a really salient point that basically what pre-crime is about is the merging of national security, i.e. intelligence agencies, with law enforcement and the criminal justice system. And basically, yes, this is a coup by intelligence agencies, and pre-crime has always been intended to be that. Essentially, that's what you have, again, back in the Iran-Contra, this was the U.S. national security state. This was the CIA or people on the National Security Council and people in military intelligence and things like that involved in these efforts. And as we've talked about again on the program before, these efforts, of course, happened a lot after 9/11, involving a lot of the same people, again, trying to get military intelligence or intelligence agencies through things like total information awareness, basically doing this exact same thing. And there's been different iterations of that. One, for example, being Palantir, sort of being an outgrowth of that's still around today and doing a lot of this predictive policing, pre-crime stuff. And a lot of these companies, whether they're founded by Israelis or founded by Americans, they share a lot of the same investors, the venture capital people, the same people on their boards. And it's pretty clear who's doing what and for what purpose, right? And I also want to say that some of my past reporting for TLAB as well on stuff like the WEF Partnership Against Cybercrime, which is also led by an Israeli military intelligence guy involved in a lot of the same circles that are actually in this article, that is all about trying to get national security agencies to fuse with the banks, the financial sector. So at the same time, just for context here, before we get into the specifics of this article, you have the national security state at the same time trying to take over both law enforcement and the banks. That's insane. And no one's talking about that. And I think a lot of people need to focus on these issues because it's a lot more than just a surveillance system. So like some people just read the headline and didn't read the article, right? And they're like, well, yeah, it's probably not good to have cameras watching your kids all the time, but it's not that bad. No, because as we'll see here, this particular company, it's not just like cameras that people have been using for decades to watch stuff. These are smart cameras with a lot of different functionalities, and the goal is to basically automate responses, or that's not even the right way to explain it. So I guess we should just probably get into the specifics of the article to sort of explain what the system is and why it's really should not be all over schools, churches, synagogues, community centers,
everywhere,
all these different places.
As you make clear. Yeah, your article, this is sprawling. They're obviously starting on this first ledge, but it's very clear as you make in the article that they're trying to get this in ubiquitously across the United States. But you mentioned a couple of things, and let's get into, the main core part of this really does stand out to me. The history around it and how it's been used with the same individuals. Now it's already about kind of monitoring the dissidents, and that's this quiet background to what's being built under the guise of stopping shootings. That's the point you keep making in this article. And it's so
or Biden's war on domestic terrorism. There's a major pre-crime component to that, and pre-crime and censorship are all about eliminating dissent.
Right. And again, the whole white supremacy kind of clumsy overlay to the whole thing. And it's so transparent. And this is where this is interesting to note. And I think I say this anytime this conversation comes up, that we need to remember that, especially today, when talking about the main core, which you mentioned in there, and this comes from the whole constitutive government plan. That's the list of the dangerous people, if, in the event of one of those emergencies, that people who are too constitutionalists, believe too much in the Constitution, are in fact verifiably listed under those kind of lists, which just shows you where these people are really coming from. The whole merging the national security state with law enforcement, and you mentioned the banks. I mean, isn't this just the World Economic Forum model that we're talking about? Is that how you see that overlap? Is it just the same thing?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, so I don't want to get too off topic, but like the partnership against cybercrime stuff that I wrote about for TLAV, I think in 2021, it basically was like, so look at Israel. In Israel, they created the cybersecurity, national security linked bureau. And they essentially merged with the banks and their regulators to stop cybercrime. And so we should replicate that model everywhere. And, a lot of these models, I talk about in the article, for example, how Netanyahu has openly talked about how it's deliberate policy that they have merged the tech industry and their national security state. Like the private tech industry, like it's a deliberate policy, and he even says so. And he also throws academia in the mix, that it's the military, intelligence, academia, and industry all together. And this is really a recipe for fascism. And if you look at the history of Likud, which is of course Netanyahu's party, and Menachem Begin and Irgun, Irgun is the precursor to Likud, and Irgun was created by a guy, I think his name was Jabotinsky was his last name. And he overtly was very clear that he modeled his group after the policies of Benito Mussolini, who is best known for his corporatism model of fascism, which is a merging of corporate and state power. Right. So that's essentially what you have here. And Israel has been used to sort of incubate that model. And a lot of it has come from the fact that Israel, since it was founded in 1948, has been under a continual state of emergency. We're going to constantly be destroyed. We're constantly in a state of war and all of this stuff. So they've been able to justify a lot of these policies for a pretty extensive amount of time relative to other countries. And if you read books that praise the startup culture of Israel, like the one written by Dan Senor, who was a big guy at the Foreign Policy Initiative, which is the successor to the Project for a New American Century. He's like an American neocon guy. He basically, his argument for why Israel's startup culture is so successful is because they've merged the military with industry. Right. And I mean, that's essentially the Mussolini model at the end of the day.
And that's kind of where I think, if you tell me where I think we should start on that is, because that seems like the really central point in all this. We can either start with the anonymous funding, so I think that's obviously one of the central kind of problems, or the background of previously up until now, and even this company, or either Carbine or Gabriel, having essentially either current or ex-Mossad, like behind the scenes, like really on the surface.
Yeah.
So go ahead. Where do you want to begin with that?
So this policy that I'm talking about with Netanyahu and co. went into overdrive in 2012. And in 2012 is when they did a lot of things happen. Startup Nation Central was created by Paul Singer, who's an American hedge fund guy, actually Dan Senor's boss. That was basically about preventing any country from opposing Israeli domestic or foreign policy by ceding, making them dependent on Israeli technology and technology companies that are tied to the national security state of Israel. So, that obviously has troubling implications. Also in 2012, there was the creation of Israel's National Cyber Bureau, the head of which is now the head of strategy at the World Economic Forum and is basically promoting the propagation of this corporatist model on a global scale. His name is Tal Goldstein. Sorry, I lost my train of thought for a second because a lot of this is kind of all So 2012 was also the year when they had this deliberate policy was made, which I referenced in the article, and it's been admitted in Israeli mainstream media that basically operations that were done in-house by the Israeli military and intelligence agencies were transferred to private companies, some of those private companies being created for that explicit purpose. In other cases, intelligence agents working on doing operations and different projects for intelligence agencies. When they're doing that within the intelligence agencies, they were encouraged by their superiors to create essentially a front company to do that, within the private sector. So since then, there have been a slew of Israeli tech companies that have come on the scene that have been created by alumni of all these intelligence agencies. And so given that that's an explicit policy, you can't really know for sure if a company, an Israeli tech company, is one of those fronts or is it not? Some companies we've heard of, have been admitted as being fronts as part of this program. The most well-known one, of course, is Black Cube, which became kind of notorious in past years because of its association with people like Ehud Barak, Harvey Weinstein, and whatnot. But Carbine 9/11, is pretty obviously one as well because Ehud Barak was the guy that created it. And it had ties to Jeffrey Epstein and all other sorts of, Peter Thiel, who created Palantir, is a major funder of it as well. And, it's basically what it's seeking to do is construct this pre-crime system that, as we've talked about already, has been a longstanding agenda of collaborative efforts of American and Israeli intelligence. So Carbine does that. And so does this company called Gabriel. They're basically building, as I note in the article, a very extensive pre-crime infrastructure in locations that would never really seek to have any sort of that infrastructure installed in their buildings and at their locations.
Right. So go ahead.
No, well, basically, Gabriel and Carbine fit together very well, and they fit together with another company called Mark 43. Which is the main people backing that is David Petraeus, the former CIA director and I guess head of forces in I think it was Iraq or Afghanistan, I can't remember. And then Jeff Bezos and Ashton Kutcher and people like that. So and David Petraeus is also now a major investor in Carbine. So, they're interconnected, and then you have links between all these other guys. One of the main investors in Carbine and one of the main investors in Gabriel are the same, Hanaco Ventures and stuff like that. So there's, a lot of interconnections between them. And of course, as I note in the article, Gabriel's advisory board is stuffed with, former deputy directors of Mossad, former heads of the intelligence directorate at Israel, all sorts of people like that, as well as, former top FBI guys, former top CIA guys. It's a collaboration of Israeli and American intelligence. And it's not just the advisory board, Israeli media reports on this particular company note that it's also backed by top leaders in Mossad, the FBI, and the CIA. Yeah, so, that's pretty telling.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm jokingly, former, and it certainly could be, but even then, as you made clear in your article, and again, the only reason it looks like this is because when you highlight Unlimited Hangout, it gets really tiny and it's hard to see. So I do the simplified version. Again, here's the article, which will include the show notes. What you write here as well, that Netanyahu, again, to make it very, very clear, it's not just, oh, well, we encourage former military and intelligence to start their own companies, but like overtly arguing, as you write here, he outlined this policy in the Cyber Tech conference in Tel Aviv. He stated that Israel's emergence as one of the top 5 cyber powers had required allowing this combination of military intelligence, academia, and industry to converge in one place. That's not the same thing. He's literally telling you, as you're saying, that we're blending these things, not just allowing them to make
it's intentional. In the interview that I cite above that paragraph, he admits he calls it a very deliberate policy. And in the paragraph below that paragraph, you have former head of Mossad, Tamer Pardo, saying that his words, everyone in Israeli cyber tech, in their cyber tech sector is an alumni of Israeli intelligence. And then he compares Mossad itself to a startup. And then after he leaves Mossad, he goes and becomes the chair of one of these companies that, again, shares some of the same investors and people on the board as Carbine and some of these other ones, Sepio Systems, a cybersecurity company. It's nuts. At some point, I'd like to map out all these companies and how they share their, I want to see the same people on their board and the same funders and see what sort of comes up. But for now, Carbine is one of these companies that is pretty clearly one of them. And of course, the only one that's been officially admitted is Black Cube. But I think by the time this article came out from Israeli mainstream media in 2019, they'd already been kind of exposed as that anyway. Right. So
this one's been removed, which is interesting. This is one of the links we talked about during the election special in regard to Carbine.
Yeah.
But here's the way back. Just to show you. Go ahead and talk after this. This is the guy we're talking about right here, who is a former Israeli army officer who served in different positions in the Special Elite Forces and Intelligence Corps. So can you speak on why? Go ahead.
Yeah, well, I'm planning to write an update about Carbine because since, they were exposed as having like Ehud Barak as the chairman of their board, Epstein Associates as directors of the company, Epstein himself put $1 million into it, and all these other connections. All the co-founder, they've overhauled their board. They took almost everyone off and they've replaced them all with Americans. People like Michael Chertoff.
That's how it's actually more telling than I think they realize, actually.
Yeah, well, because they're not trying to really market this so much in Israel. Their focus is the United States with Carbine and also Mexico, oddly enough. It's mainly the U.S. and Mexico. I don't really know why that is. But yeah, so Carbine's one of these companies that, well, I guess let me explain what Carbine does. So basically Carbine is...
overlap, actually, to Gabriel and Carbine, right? Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, Carbine is poised to be the new 911 emergency system in the United States. It's already running in numerous counties. And actually last year, which is also the same year that Gabriel started getting installed all over the place, the U.S. Congress approved, I think, like 10, I think it was billion. I might be wrong. It was an insane amount of money to basically create a nationwide interconnected 911 system. Called Next Generation 911 to replace the legacy system of existing 911 call centers, which are generally based locally, and it's a decentralized system. So they want to make it nationwide and interconnected, and Carbine basically has all these other functionalities offering instant GPS location and live video feeds of the emergencies, which is what they use to sell it to people, and that you can also text 911 and all of this stuff. But what they don't tell you is that when you call 911 on your phone and the 911 system you're calling is connected to Carbine, they can pull pretty much everything off of your phone and have indefinite access to your microphone and video. And they use that. It's not on their website anymore, but at the time we talked about it, it was. But they use that to analyze your past and current behavior and use it to predict what you'll do in the future, i.e. the predictive policing pre-crime functionality. And that's the same vision that Gabriel has for its products. So but Carbine's the 911 system. Mark 43 is the software for law enforcement that does a lot of the same stuff. And then Gabriel's the one for all these civilian locations. It focuses mainly on schools, houses of worship, community centers, but now it's trying to expand to banks, to retail stores, to data centers and corporate campuses for the biggest big tech companies in the country, the 5 big companies, so like Amazon, Microsoft, Apple, Google, blah, blah, blah.
Is the argument
all
that
of
these
those
companies then have access to all the data of those locations?
Well, of course they would.
Jesus, think about that. Like, and then, so we're talking big 5 tech companies, which have, I mean, that's a lock on everything happening in this country, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, it would be really unprecedented. So if you see those, 3 companies as working together,
my God,
it starts to look totally insane.
And think about
especially when you consider,
No, sorry. Just think about people screaming about, I mean, rightly so. China, Russia, these people are wildly pro-Israel, and we're worried about a foreign takeover. We're attacking this country. And I think we made this same point in 2020. It's right on the surface where you can see the Israel's government doing the same thing they accuse the other countries of, but they don't talk about that. I just want to make sure people see that. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, I mean, they don't talk about it. It's unfortunate, but I don't necessarily see this as a foreign takeover because our intelligence agencies are and have been complicit.
At least in their perspective, that's what it would be. But you make an excellent point. It's
yeah, and I've argued in some past pieces at Mint, like when I was at Mint Press News, and I was writing a lot more about Israel than I do now. That there was basically an effort to create what I would call a binational security state, essentially fusing the security states of the 2 countries, and that is a policy explicitly promoted in both the U.S. and Israel. Now, if you want to say that the reason the U.S. has supported that is because of people like Jeffrey Epstein and Blackman, all that stuff. I mean, possibly, but a lot of these guys are just like, as long as I get more money and power for me, it doesn't really matter, what I sign off on or who I team up with or whatever. So,
but I could see a valid argument could be made that even that is essentially a takeover. Like you're just abusing the corruption of the people at the top. At the same time, you're surreptitiously working your way in. Either way, I think it's already, like you're saying, we've long since been past that.
Right, from 1948 on of U.S. intelligence, Israeli intelligence, and organized crime. I mean, it killed a sitting U.S. president in 1963. That was a takeover. So we're just like there's been different phases of this takeover over time, right? And so, now this is just the complete insane phase that they've been waiting for.
Right.
For a really long time, if you look back at the antecedents, like we talked about a little bit earlier with Main Core. And the Iran-Contra stuff and all of that.
Where do you see this going in the context of, I guess some of the current discussions like the Great Reset overlap, COVID-19, foreign policy?
Yeah.
Like, is it everything? I mean, where do you see that?
So this is the 4th industrial revolution coming to the criminal justice system and the surveillance state. Because when you see how these 3 companies I'm talking about fit together, it's pretty clear what's going on. So Mark 43, again, is mostly backed by CIA people. The Israeli involvement in that particular company isn't so obvious, but the CIA involvement is excessively obvious. Yeah. And so with Mark 43, this is all law enforcement stuff, and it's meant to automate, I'd probably say, about half of what police officers do. Right. And they're like, oh yeah, we'll reduce your work burden and all of that stuff. But as we've seen with AI and a lot of this other stuff, that is all a stepping stone to automating it completely.
Right.
Right. And so,
Oh, I just add, and that the less and less human interaction, the less and less we have an opportunity to stop it, engage with it. What happens if we, like, just on a quick side note, I was watching this first McDonald's in, I think it was Texas, I forget, where it's like first automated McDonald's, where there's no people, you can drive up and things come out. My very first
it's novel for now, but soon it will be all there is. That's the goal. And so they're not just doing this with fast food, they're doing this with your police department. Yeah,
exactly.
So the security
real quickly, just don't forget it. My thought is just that what happens when you go up there and suddenly you have a problem? I'm sure they're going to have some kind of process for it, but you get the wrong food, something happens, it's made wrong. What are you going to do? You know what I mean? That's kind of the world we're getting into, where you have to go through those channels. Like, imagine calling one of these, call centers for some kind of internet company, and you're dealing with a constant AI system. It's impossible. We all know that. Get ready for everything all the time. So go ahead.
Yeah. How dystopian is that? Like, scary. Trapped in this like robotic voice customer service loop.
It's right out of Idiocracy. It's the same damn thing. God, that movie is prescient. I swear to God.
Yeah. Mike Judge. I'm really happy I share a birthday with that guy. Anyway, so I forgot exactly what I was saying, but basically, like, this automation is happening already in law enforcement. So security drones, the robotic dogs like Spot that are already being used by various police departments across the country. Those can have both the drones, obviously, and the dogs can have weapons added to them. And that's already been happening. In San Francisco, they were about to sign off on letting them kill people, the robots. Right.
Yeah, we were reading about that. I don't think we touched on that though. Could you explain people the increase? We didn't touch on the drones and the kind of the logical step of taking the Gabriel systems and kind of weaponizing it, or at least being possible.
Well, I haven't even talked about Gabriel yet. This is about Mark 43, which is all this law enforcement software meant to automate about half of police work, which means they're going to reduce police size. And of course, if you're paying attention, this dovetails perfectly with the defund the police agenda of, which is actually promoted by a lot of Silicon Valley people, oddly enough, because when you defund the police, we have less money, but how convenient. We have this new technology that's so cost effective now, that we can replace half of the police officers in the department with Mark 43's software. Well, hooray. And yeah, so Mark 43 is meant to interface with next generation 911, which, as I just mentioned, is Carbine. Right. Mm-hmm. And Gabriel is the other side, is the opposite side of this. So you have Carbine in the middle, 911 emergency services connects you to law enforcement response. Right. And on the other side, you have, how is 911 going to get called? Well, in 2019, when I first wrote about Carbine, they had stuff on their website talking about how in the future, things like smart city sensors, like on street lamps and stuff, would call emergency services for you without you even having to dial anything. Right. Man. And this idea that the calling of emergency services itself will not be done by you. It will be an automated process by smart cameras and sensors. Okay, so that's exactly what Gabriel is. But it's being installed in schools, it's being installed in houses of worship and community centers, all under the guise of this will stop mass shootings, which incidentally enough was the exact same marketing line, I guess, that was used by Carbine in 2019 as well.
It's just rife for corruption. And
that's also the same year that William Barr adopted pre-crime as formal Department of Justice policy, using mass shootings as justification for that. And before he did that, he predicted that there would be a mass shooting that would galvanize public opinion around exactly that before he announced that policy. All of that was some of my past reporting in the latter half of 2019 at Mint Press News. Very insane time to be on this particular journalistic beat, to be sure. So anyway, Gabriel originally was built around its panic button. Yeah, which is like installed on the wall in schools or whatever. And that was originally all it was, right? And it had a microphone, it had a camera, so it would give like live video feed right in front of the panic button. It could be activated manually or remotely through a smartphone app. Right. And so, that was advertised as like being a way to stop mass shootings or notify people fast or whatever, and also present video and audio, from the scene, which traditional 911 doesn't exactly do in the same way, right? Well, since then, of course, they've added another way to activate the panic button remotely, and this is through the use of Gabriel's proprietary smart cameras all over the facility, right? And those cameras and the panic button and Gabriel's system are referred to as activation triggers. Yeah. So basically, and they admit this, it's AI and machine learning that decide whether the alarm mode is triggered or not. Yeah.
Right.
And so they advertise this as a thing to stop mass shootings. So they say, for example, the smart camera can identify weapons. Yeah. It sees a weapon in the camera feed. It can recognize it just like it can recognize your face. It has facial recognition as well, right? And so it can recognize a weapon in the parking lot before the person hits the building. You connect it to the doors of the facility. It locks the doors and keeps them from coming in, right? That doesn't sound too bad, right? I mean, yeah, mass shootings are horrible, so we don't want them to happen. But that's not where this stops, okay? as I mentioned earlier, they're making major efforts to court retail, banking, Silicon Valley, what have you. The examples they give for banking and retailing on their own website are quite nuts. So, for example, not only do they detect weapons, they can detect abnormal behavior. Well, what does that mean? That's pretty subjective, isn't it? And one of their corporate examples for the banking sector is, you have loiterers in the bank lobby. Oh, those
the drones.
Nasty loiterers. Yeah, it's basically like activate the security drones and clear the scene. Yeah.
That's incredible.
I mean, we're laughing about it, but it's incredibly Orwell.
Well, in a facetious way. It's like, or like macabre. It's almost like it's so alarming that we have to laugh. Like they're literally, and she's not making that up, by the way. That's actually the drone deployment was discussed after loitering. Like it's just blowing my mind.
Yeah. Deploy security to clear the scene. And it refers to like loitering and active shooter threats. Like it's the same thing. I mean, it's just like, who are these guys? You know, it's just silly. So anyway, the abnormal behavior thing is also touted for retail, you know, unusual behavior that may be shoplifting, alert security, automate it all. You know, the cameras do all the work. And they talk about elsewhere, like if you go to their company page and they talk about their vision and what they've been working on, they claim to be constantly integrating new technologies. And so with this, you know, there's all the different things that can activate the system, right? And so now they're integrating what else? Security drones and robotics. Spot the dog and the things we were talking about earlier, right? That might replace police. Those can be activated on site, potentially weaponized and authorized to use deadly force and sent to, you know, hunt someone down who's been detected engaging in abnormal behavior.
You know, it seems like on the surface of this, and you've basically made the argument in the article in the same way, is that this is being overlapped with Carbine 911, you know, and so you've got the police software, you've got the Carbine 911 centers, then you've got the local area, that it's just a logical conclusion that this is going to be like, oh, it works. Now we're going to roll this out to everybody's homes. So now this is your new 911 essentially. And then
they're piloting it.
You can be quarantined in any moment because they declare that. I mean, that's on the surface almost of this whole thing, isn't it?
Yeah. This system is being piloted right now. And once they feel confident enough, they will scale it up and implement it everywhere. You know, this next generation 9/11 thing is really about to pop off really quickly. Mm-hmm.
Now, when you say that, is that your opinion, or do you feel that is that stated explicitly somewhere that this is?
Yeah, Congress last year earmarked, I forget how much money. It's either 10 million. I think it's 10 billion. I mean, it's like a lot of money explicitly to install next generation 9/11 nationwide.
Man,
because it was going too slow. Adoption of Gabriel also going too slow. So enter the anonymous philanthropist who's now paying for the systems to be installed all across the country. He is planning to, he's put up $1 million and he's planning to put up money to get it in every school in the entire United States.
Prior to this anonymous donation, this was kind of at a stall? And the money
sounds like it. Yeah, because they were going to, it was at a stall for schools and churches and their initial targets, right? Mm-hmm. They were getting more interest from these other sectors, apparently. Silicon Valley, banking, retail.
Interesting.
So, like I said earlier, the reason they really wanted to target schools and these other types of places is because they're traditionally places that aren't going to want systems like this. They don't need systems like this. Retail is going to be like, we want to stop shoplifters. Great. This system will do that. Or banking, we want to stop people robbing the bank. This will do that. So the only thing you can do to really market that to a school is be like, this will stop a mass shooting. But if mass shootings aren't constantly happening and the fear isn't jacked up, they're not going to pay. They're not going to shell out, $30,000 for this system.
Right. Well, so obviously the pre-crime overlap to all of this is the biggest concern for me. And we discussed clearly that there's a very dangerous intelligence background that drives this in its own nefarious directions. Yeah. But can you speak on the pre-crime direction? I mean, you and I have talked about a lot about this. But for those who may be new to this whole thing, why that's such a concern and how it can be abused, especially with these people. Go ahead.
If you pull up the article, it's in there. Gabriel, on their vision part of their website, says we basically anticipate this being used as a completely automated system at some point in the not so distant future. I don't remember the exact quote, but it's in the article. But they're essentially saying that, they're installing it as it is now, but they're continually upgrading it. And the way it's going is going, and they even highlight it, like they put it in bold themselves on their website to stop mass shooters before they strike.
Right.
Yeah, there it is. Identify mass casualty threats prior to the first action taken.
Right.
And it's anticipate mass casualty events based on human behavior. What does that mean? So
there's a core question that we always bring up in this constitutionally, right? Like, even if somebody was actually planning on committing a crime, how can we legally arrest somebody and charge somebody if crimes haven't been committed yet? And that gets into this dangerous world that's being created.
Yes.
Go ahead. You have a thought?
So here's why this is bad. So right before that part you highlighted, see how it says based on human behavior? So these smart cameras that Gabriel has, we've already seen it, right? We just talked about it. They detect abnormal behavior. They're not just surveilling you, they're studying you.
Right.
Yeah. And it's just like Carbine, what I mentioned earlier. The whole idea of trying to analyze your past and current behavior to predict what you will do in the future. This is pre-crime. And it's all based on studying your behavior. And this is all, Palantir, Carbine, Gabriel, they're all doing the same thing. And they're all interconnected companies.
So you kind of
feel are studying human behavior to determine who will commit a crime in the future and who won't, and you'll be at the mercy of the algorithm because all this shit, like they say here, is going to be automated.
So do you feel that the crime stopping factor is more of just an excuse to be able to study people for other reasons, or is that how do you see that fitting in? Is that just the lie?
I think, well, like we said earlier, ultimately the goal of pre-crime, just like it dovetails with the censorship agenda. It's all about stopping dissent. Okay. Right. So, I think that's ultimately what pre-crime's about. You're stopping people based on, well, look at how pre-crime's already been used since Bill Barr made it policy in 2019. It's most of the people that have been arrested under that particular program called DEEP were arrested because of their social media activity or their online activity.
Yeah. That's a chilling statement. So this would arguably include also online activity, or that's already happening, right? So we don't even need to include that.
Yeah,
that's already done, essentially.
But this is the other side of it. So, they're trying to go after people based on what they do online and analyzing them based on what the data they mine off them offline. But they also want to essentially data mine you by what you're doing in the real world as well.
Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for continuing to support The Last American Vagabond. Again, we have the event coming up on March 20th that I really hope you will take the time to join, or at least share, get it out there. We've got pirate stream stuff coming up soon. We're working on the website right now. We got a lot coming your way, guys. And the truth is we're going to keep doing this regardless because we believe in this. We believe it's important. So it'd be all the better if you support us while we do it, but we're going to do it anyway. But the bottom line is we need your support to actually do this the right way and actually make real change happen. As you guys know, as we've been saying, we're saying we want to build what we have here to something that is, can stand on its own legs, doesn't need the other social media platforms, that we can become our own hub of information that people can go to if they want. That's how I'm seeing it even today, that I'm done trying to push through some of these things and reach the people over there. Like, I'm putting this out and I'm hoping that it reaches everybody. And my goal is to reach the people over there that don't realize they're being lied to. But I'm done trying to force this in where people don't want it to be, right? You guys support this platform. So we're going to continue to do what we think is right. And hopefully that gets its way in front of people. And the point is, anybody out there that is objective and cares enough to just consider what we're saying, it'll be here for you. So we need your support because it's difficult to exist in a world like this, in a dynamic like this, where what we're doing, most people don't like it. Even people seeking the truth on sides of the paradigm, and people attack from all angles, including people that everyone we seem to be fighting for. So those of you out there that realize what we're trying to accomplish, which is difficult, at the very least, help get this information out. Thank you for being here. As always, question everything. Come to your own conclusions. Stay vigilant.